Welcome everybody. We're going to look today at the top Marvel comics of 1972. These are the most valuable comics, the most important comics, the ones you should have in your collection. Let's break down the list. Starting at number 10, we have the Defenders #1. This is the first issue of a very long-running, popular, ongoing series. You'll see on my chart that it ranks 10th of 1972, but it also ranks 66th of the entire decade of the 1970s in the 2020 Overstreet Annual Price Guide, and we're going to use that to compare past years. So you'll see in the last 5 years, it has dropped from 53rd place, so you'll be able to see from this chart whether comics are heating up in price or dropping compared to others. So Defenders #1 overall has been stalling in the Overstreet Price Guide for a few years, and current price guide near mint 9.2. Raw copies guide price is $295, where it's been stalled for a couple of years. Let's look at more in-depth details on this book. It does feature a brand new superhero team featuring the Hulk, Doctor Strange, and Submariner. It's the first appearance of Necrodamus, and also features a cameo of Omegatron. It's the 66th most valuable Marvel comic of the 70s. The print run was estimated at 152,000 copies released in 1972. This is one of many of the famous 1972 framed covers where you can see that there's a picture within a red border. This is the classic look that Marvel went with in 1972. Looking at the CGC census, 1,405 copies in total graded, but 73 copies graded 9.6 or better. Heritage Auctions has sold 188 copies ever since they started selling comics 20 years ago. There is the classic 20-cent cover. Looking at the Overstreet Price Guide, in low grade, you'll see in the last decade, it's not really moved at all. And in high grade, it's moved up just a little bit, but again, it's been stalled at $295 for a couple years. And the overall census, you can see 1,405 copies with 16.9.8. Number 9 on our list is Marvel Team Up #1. This is another long-running, ongoing series, and started with featuring the Human Torch. And it ranks as the 58th most valuable Marvel comic of the 1970s, and it's held fairly steady, you can see, in the last 5 years. It is slowly moving up in raw copies. Let's go learn a little bit more about that one. Another classic frame cover. This one is black, so many people will tell you that this is a hard one to find in high grade because you can sure see the spine ticks very easily on that one with the black cover. Spider-Man also appears in this book, as well as Sandman. Features a Gil Kane cover, and the print run estimated at 218,000 copies. Almost 1,000 copies graded by CGC in the last 2 decades, and Heritage has sold 126 copies in the last 2 decades. Not a lot overall, but it's not a first appearance book. It's just a key #1 issue. Overstreet Price Guide just creeping up very slowly in low grade, but high grades making consistent growth. So definitely some demand in this book. Of course, go to eBay and go to GP Analysis if you want to see more up-to-date current sales of raw copies and graded copies, if you really want to know where the market is right now. On the census, we can see the 971 copies graded. Only 3 are 9.8s, again, due to that black cover. So that's a pretty tough one to find. Number 8 most valuable comic of 1972. This is many people's favorite of the year. Tomb of Dracula #1, featuring the first appearance of Dracula in this version from Marvel Comics. Ranks 49th overall for the 70s, but it's down a little bit. But it is continuing to move, but it had stalled for a number of years and now starting to pick up again. There's a few interesting things about this book that I want you to know about, which you might not be aware. So first of all, yes, it is Marvel's Dracula, first appearance, Frank Drake. Print run estimated 175,000 copies. That's pretty high for a non-superhero title, but this was a classic right from the get-go. And you can see at the CGC census, a lot of copies graded. 178, 9.6 or better. Only 174 copies graded at Heritage. There's the classic cover, again framed in red, perhaps a blood color. Overstreet Price Guide, low grade, not moving really at all. and high grade just starting to take off again, so lately demand. And in the CGC census, the 1900 copies in total, 53 9.8s. Now what's interesting about this is out of all the books on this top 10 list, this book has the most 9.8s by far, 53 of them. The next closest competitor only has 16, which we saw in Defenders #1. For this being a non-superhero comic, this is an amazingly high number of copies graded, period. And amazing how many high-grade copies have survived, more than any of the superhero key books on this list. So that's pretty interesting. Number 7 on our list is Marvel Premiere. Number 1 features the first appearance of Warlock with that official name. Ranks 47th of the decade, and in the last 5 years, you'll see it's grown on the chart. It's actually moving quite steady, and this has proven in the last few years to be one of the best investment books on this list. And let's tell you a few more details about this book. It also features the origin of Warlock, a Gil Kane cover and art. Another black border book makes this one tough to find in high grade. The series ran 9 years with 61 issues. It was really a tryout series. It was kind of like Showcase for DC. So Warlock would only appear in a few issues before Doctor Strange took over. Print run estimated at 131,000 copies, so that's sort of on the low side for a Marvel superhero title. So generally that means people bought less copies of this when it was brand new. CGC census has really taken off in the last 4 years. You can see that the number of copies graded is almost doubled in the last 4 years. There are 79 copies, 9.6 or higher. Heritage has doubled their amount of copies sold in just the last 4 years. So definitely a lot of demand for this book. Classic cover, black frame. Features the Hulk and Thor also on the cover. Overstreet, even the low grade, has doubled in the last decade. And in high grade, you can see it's almost 3.5 times its price. So definitely a hot mover, this book. Only 10 9.8s, but 1,770 copies total graded. Next on our list, number 6, Amazing Adventures number 11. This book did not become a key until only in the last 20 years. It features the new Beast, tying into the X-Men, and the X-Men have a cameo, which is actually rare for this time, because the X-Men did not have their own ongoing series at this time, as the X-Men were not popular, but they did have a cameo appearance in this story, ranking number 6, also number 44 overall for the 1970s at Marvel Comics. And learning a little bit more about this book. First appearance of this new version of the Beast, and first appearance of Brand Corporation. Gil Kane and Bill Everett cover, art also by Tom Sutton and Sid Shores. Print run estimated 175,000 copies. Beast would run in a number of issues in this series, starting with this issue, number 11. And you can see this one's also been quite popular in the last decade. Copies graded has gone up about 300%. Classic cover, black frame again on this one. Overstreet price guide, here's lots of data for this one. Hasn't moved too much in low grade, but in high grade the book has almost tripled. So definitely this has been one of the best investing books in the last few years for higher grade copies. On the census, 878 in total, only 7 9.8s of this book. Next on our list, Marvel Feature number 1. It features the first appearance of the Defenders, who would shortly get their own ongoing series, which we've already seen on the list. Ranking number 5 with a raw value in Overstreet at $525. Ranks 34th overall of the decade, holding very steady. So it's not increasing, but not dropping either overall in the overall market of 1970s Bronze Age investing. And what else can we tell you about this book? Well, what I like about this one is that it has a Neil Adams cover and also Bill Everett art. Print run estimated at 175,000 copies. This is a 25-cent giant square-bound issue. So again, This is the era when these were popular, and again, a lot of them are much harder to find in high grade due to spine damage for sure. Features the first appearance and the origin of the team, featuring the Incredible Hulk, Doctor Strange, and the Submariner. On the CGC census, you can see this has really been a hot book in the last decade. It's gone up about 350% in number of copies graded. There is only 61 9.6 or better copies. Heritage sales have really spiked in the last few years. And this one does not have the background wrap around the picture. First one we've seen so far like that. In the Overstreet Price Guide, low grade has only moved just slightly in the last decade, but high grade has gone up about 250%. And on the census, 1,451 copies with 10 9.8s. Next in our countdown of the most valuable and important Marvel Comics of 1972, we have Marvel Spotlight number 2, featuring the first appearance of Werewolf by Night. This book did not become a key issue at all until the 1990s, when we had a bit of the Bronze Age collecting market really take off in the mid-90s. And now people have realized that this is quite a hard book to find. Again, being a horror title, not superhero, so tougher to find. Ranks 25th overall for the 1970s, which is higher than it was 5 years ago. So this book truly is growing. And you can see on our list, it's actually one of the biggest movers in the Overstreet Price Guide, with a huge leap from just last year, over $230 increase in raw copies for 9.2. And going into more details on this book, we can tell you that not only is it the origin and first appearance of Werewolf by Night, who is Jack Russell, but it also features another Neil Adams cover and also Mike Ploog art, classic artist of the 1970s. Print run estimated at 200,000 copies. This is another square-bound 25-cent thicker issue, red background. On the CGC census, you can see that copies have tripled in the last decade, and Heritage has really taken off in the last 4 years. Again, this book is really in super high demand at this time. Overstreet Price Guide in the last 2 decades, though, very little movement in low grade raw. High grade has doubled. And what else can we tell you? So 1,140 copies graded in total, all grades. No 9.8s at all. This is the only book in the top 10 that does not have a single 9.8 graded copy. There are 22 9.6s, so that's the best copy you can possibly obtain at this time for this key book. Number 3 is probably the most interesting book in the top 10. It is Night Nurse, number 1 of a short-lived 4-issue series. This is not a superhero title. It is the first appearance of the new version of Linda Carter, who actually had her own Marvel series back in the early 60s. Those are super hard to find. Linda Carter, Student Nurse. She was brought back with a horror tint on this short-lived series, which did not sell well. For the longest time, it had very little value, but once Bronze Age collectors started to realize how rare this book is, and especially when they brought Night Nurse back in and tied it into the superhero universe, that demand really started taking off. And this book has had huge gains in just the last 5 years alone. Ranks number 3 of 1972, also 24th of the decade, and it has been moving up. What else can we tell you about this classic book? Not only do you have trouble finding it in any condition, but it, as I say, it tied into the original Linda Carter Student Nurse series from 1961, which ran for a couple years. So you might want to hunt out those titles. But look at how few copies are on the census. Only 340 copies graded in total, 18 9.6 or better. Heritage has only sold 32 copies ever. This book does not come to market that often. There are some, of course, always on eBay, though, if you're hunting. So, 20-cent cover. It's got the red background on this one. And in Overstreet, definitely taking off in just the last few years alone. Low grade is moving. High grade is taking huge leaps. And on the census, 340 copies total. 4 9.8s, and 14 9.6s. All of the Night Nurse issues are very hard to find. Again, low print runs, no demand. It's kind of weird who they thought this book was even marketed to when it was originally released. Number 2 most valuable comic of 1972 is Hero for Hire #1, featuring the first appearance of Luke Cage. And of course, this book was never that expensive, but really took off in the last decade, especially when news hit that Luke Cage would get his own Netflix TV series. So this book now ranks number 2 of the decade. It's now worth $1,375 raw in the Overstreet Price Guide. Huge growth. Look back when you could have bought copies for $3 back in the 80s. Ranks 14th overall for the 1970s, where it's basically been for the last 5 years. So it's kind of stuck in that position. And just learning a few more little details about this book. It is the origin and first appearance of Luke Cage. Also the first appearance of Diamondback. Covers by George Tuska. And there is a print run of approximately 175,000 copies of this book. And look at the demand since the TV show is hitting. Copies at CGC have gone crazy in the last 6 years alone. That's a huge gain. Almost 2,000 more copies graded in just the last 6 years. 9.6s have not moved up much. There are not many out there. And why is that? The black background cover of this classic book. And the Overstreet Price Guide, again, it was a reasonably priced key book up until 2015. It really started taking off. And so now it's over $1,000 for a high-grade book. Lots of copies graded, 27, 12 9.8. Looking on the overall chart, it's interesting to note that due to the hype of this book, that it's the second most commonly graded book in our top 10. And the #1 most valuable key comic book from Marvel Comics of 1972. This is such a major comic. The best of the best, making huge jumps in Overstreet alone. And if Overstreet is jumping, then the real-time market is even hotter. The #1 book of the year ranking, also the #4 most valuable raw, non-variant price comic of the 1970s. And notice in the last 5 years alone, it's really moved up high. First appearance of Ghost Rider. In the last 5 years alone, it's gone from $850 to $2,800 raw. Let's see what else we can tell you about this classic book. All these specs that I'm showing you, these come from the book I have written called Investing in Comic Books. So you can learn about all the key books, and I've collected all the data. I've been doing this for over a decade, so it's a handy reference to really put things together to see just what's going on. Perfect index to all the key books. First appearance and origin of the stuntman Johnny Blaze, and Mike Plug, cover artist, and print run estimated at 200,000 copies. Again, super hot book. In the last decade, CGC has just gone crazy with the number of copies. It's almost doubled in just the last 4 years alone. Still high grade, very hard to find. 9.6 or better, only 38 copies. Heritage sales are picking up more and more. Very classic black cover. Overstreet Price Guide, you can see that it's always had a little bit of growth over the last 2 decades, but in the last 2 years alone, it's gone nuts. So this is the only book on our list that a low grade 2.0 raw is a $100 book. And the high grade, you can see, has gone nuts as well. It's more than doubled in the last 2 years, and it has gone up 500% in the last 8 years. And back to the census, 3415 copies graded in total, only 3 copies graded 9.8. That is the most graded copy of 1972 on the CGC census in all grades combined. And because of that, its average grade is actually the lowest of all the books on the list. There are a lot of low-grade copies of this book graded. For example, a 7, there are 368 copies. That's a lot of copies. But this is a major key, the most important book of 1972. Thanks for watching this video. Check out this series every week. Please subscribe. Remember, you can go to my website, terryhoknes.com. I have written thousands of articles on comic investing and history, whether it's brand new release comics to speculate on or old comics. And of course, go to CBSI on Facebook and comicbookinvest.com to read tons more comic book related articles. Thanks for watching.